Twitter handle so that he wasn't going to get bombarded by quotes every time I spoke. I look forward to meeting him someday, just crashing one of his shows and introducing myself. Scientists did an experiment a while back where they put a barracuda in a tank, a fish, and then they dropped a little fish inside, and the barracuda went and ate it, and then they did that a few times. And then they wanted to test the memory of the fish, so they then put a glass wall in the tank that you couldn't see. It was transparent, obviously. And then they dropped a little fish on the other side of the tank, and the barracuda went to eat it and hit the wall. And it tried a few times. It banged its head against the wall a few times. And then after a while, it stopped trying to eat the fish. The scientists then removed the glass wall, and the barracuda would never go to that side of the tank. No matter how hungry it got, it would leave the little fish alone. And I think there's a lesson in there for us. We have walls that have boxed us in, and we are incapable of being the people that God has always intended for us to be. And we've got to remove those barriers, and that's what I want to talk about today. We're going to do some open brain surgery today. We're going to remove blockages in our minds that have kept us boxed in for a long, long time. There are 4 specifically that we will look at. Now, before we go too far into it, let me just tell you a story about my own life and how the Lord freed me from some thinking. And then I'll start tearing down some of these walls, okay? So, personal testimony time. When I found Christ as a university student, I got discipled by a very active church on the local community university campus. I was a part of a mega church that was popular, and everybody wanted to learn from us. I was in a college group that had 350 college students in attendance every week, and we were doing evangelism and disciple making and leadership development on campus and going on missions trips, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we were the happening place, and I was a part of it. I was growing in this. It was actually a good time. But I was also taught that if you're really called to ministry, you have to go get a degree. You have to get a master's of divinity. That's about it. So I went off to seminary and spent a fortune to become a divine master. I got a degree that nobody wants to employ, but except churches. And they know enough about me now, they don't want to employ me anyway. So I went off and got this 98-unit degree on how to exegete Greek and Hebrew and study church history and homiletics and hermeneutics and all these other fancy words that ordinary Christians can't really understand. And then I became a professional Christian. And I became pastor of a church. And I remember my first job as a senior pastor. I read the Bible, and there's really only one chief shepherd, and he ain't me. But I was the senior pastor of a church, and I was so excited because I became the pastor of that college group after a while. For 4 years, I pastored it, but I got paid like nothing, It was mostly volunteer. So I worked as a courier at night and all kinds of things, trying to get through seminary and pastor and work, and had raised a family. I had 2 kids at the time. Then I got this full-time gig where I'm paid. They showed me my salary, and I go, wow. And I get to do ministry, and they're going to pay me. I was so excited. So I moved my family about 50 miles away to this little community to be pastor of this church. And when I got there and I signed my lease on the house, I was informed that they could not actually afford that salary they promised me. And that I was going to get a much less salary I said, okay, well, that's a calling. So I had to find another job. But I was so excited to be pastor, I didn't want a job that was going to take any time away from pastoring. What could I do during the hours that I wouldn't be pastoring to make money? I found a job that paid me, at the time it was probably like $700-800 a month. It wasn't a big job, but it was what we needed to make it. I got a job as a paper delivery boy. Every single morning, I delivered 750 newspapers to homes. Now, this is a job that begins at 3 o'clock in the morning, every single morning, Sundays included. There is no vacation and there is no day off. And I began to be a delivery person. So now I had two jobs. One job, I delivered the good news. The other job, I delivered the bad news every single day. So I had to be reporting to a warehouse at 3 a.m. where they would deliver all the newspapers, and then for an hour we would fold these newspapers, put rubber bands on them, and stick them in our car, and then go deliver them. And so I would get up, I'd have to be there at 3, so I would get up at 2:58 every day and drive like a madman to the warehouse and fold papers and deliver papers, and fold papers and deliver. And I remember early on, I'm getting tired because I have no day off. And I'm delivering these papers, and I'm getting frustrated. And I remember crying out to the Lord, Lord, I have a bachelor's degree. I have a master's of divinity. And here I am doing the job of a junior high kid. What could be more humbling than this? Never ask that question. If you learn nothing this week, that alone will save your life. Never ask that question. I got fired from my paper route. You want to know what's more humbling than having a paper route? Not being able to keep it. Apparently, they gave me the list of houses, and one house didn't make the list, and so they weren't getting their paper, and so they had to fire me for not delivering to a house. Well, I told them, well, it wasn't on my list. They realized the problem. They hired me back and gave me a different route. But it was God's way of saying, it can get more humble than this. So I'm delivering papers, and the worst is Sundays, right? I don't know if it's like this in Europe, but the Sunday paper in the States is 3 times the size. It's full of advertisements and everything. And because of this, it always arrives late to the warehouse. It takes longer to fold. It fills up the car really high. The things are heavier to throw. And I haven't finished my sermon and got the bulletins printed and set up the sound system and the chairs. Because I'm the pastor of this small church, I do everything. So Sundays was rough. And I remember one Sunday, I'm throwing these huge newspapers out the window, and I'm already late, and I have so much to do that I'm thinking about, and I toss one, and I got pretty good at tossing newspapers. They just, right where they're supposed to go. So I toss one, and it's spinning in the air, and the rubber band broke. And it exploded all over the front lawn. Ads, newspaper, bad news everywhere. And I did one of those things that sometimes we do. I just pretended I didn't see it. And I just kept going. And I heard the Lord speak to me. You know what he said? He said, I live at that house. Reverse, go back, pick up the mess, put it in my car, take a nice one, and deliver a nice newspaper to Jesus' house. I got back in the car, I go to deliver the next one, he says, I live at this house too. You know what he was teaching me? That I should do all my work as unto the Lord. That I am not delivering the newspaper for the Daily Press Telegram I am delivering it for Jesus. He is my boss. And this is a job he has hired me to do. It wasn't just a job to help pay my rent. It was as much a calling on my life for that moment as my other job. I didn't get it all right away, but it was starting to sink in. One day I'm delivering the newspaper, and I notice a little Buddha statue outside. And as I deliver it, I hear the Lord tell me, pray for those people. And I have the names of everybody. So I said, okay, so I pray for them. Then I go to the next house, he says, pray for those people. And I go to the next one, he says, pray for them. And as I'm delivering all these papers, he's telling me to pray for the salvations of all these people. And I'm thinking, God, we're going to have revival. But then, I have 750 houses I'm delivering to. And my faith can only go so high. There's a glass ceiling. And I kept bumping into it. I kept thinking, I can't believe that all these people are going to get saved, Lord. He says, I didn't ask you to save them. I asked you to pray for them. Oh. And so I began to pray for everyone I was delivering a newspaper for. And that's a pretty holy calling. To be up at 3 a.m. and then figuratively be on your knees praying and interceding for the families of the community I'm a pastor of. And I'm getting paid to do it. So that very day, afterwards, I went back to my office to do my other job. And it was around 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was doing what I usually do at 10 o'clock in the morning when I had these 2 jobs. I was passed out on my desk in a pool of drool. That was my holy calling. Sound asleep on my desk, and I was given a wake-up call. The phone rang. I answered at Grace Brethren Church. And a guy seemed troubled on the other side. He says, his name was Steve. He said, I've lost my family. I've lost my wife. I've got a job I don't like. I've got a life I don't like. I was thinking seriously bad thoughts. I was thinking if I didn't live, nobody would really even care. And I was about to do something radical. And I thought, one last chance. And I opened up my phone book, and I just found a church. And I called that number, and you answered. And so I started talking with Steve and listening to Steve. And so I said, Steve, let's have breakfast tomorrow. Let's just get a cup of coffee tomorrow and just talk. He said, I can't. So, well, why not? Well, my job is I drive a big rig truck. And I don't have a car. All I have is a big rig truck. And I don't think the coffee shop will be pleased if I take up 10 parking spaces to meet with you. I said, well, we can fix that. Give me your address and I'll pick you up. And he gave me his address. And I paused. I said, Steve, I was praying for you this morning. He says, oh, that's nice. You probably pray for everybody in the world every day. You're a pastor. Actually, no. When I'm a pastor, I drool on my desk. It's my other job that got me praying for you. I am your paper boy. I was delivering your paper this morning, and the Lord told me to pray for you. Wow. So let me pick you up in the morning after my paper route, and we'll go get coffee. And we began to meet every week to talk about Jesus. He turned his whole life around, got his family back, became a follower of Christ. And I began to realize delivering newspapers can be a holy calling. I don't even know why I quit. And what kind of happened as this evolved in my mind, I began to realize that whatever job I'm doing, I'm the Lord's servant and he's my boss. And if I do it wholeheartedly for him, he can use it for his kingdom, for his will, for his purpose. And so I began to, after every route, it ends at 6 in the morning, I'd go to the same coffee house, and other people who had paper routes would come join me. And we'd have coffee and talk, and pretty soon some of them would come to Christ, and they'd start coming to the church. And we hit a recession. A lot of people lost their jobs. I had a rock star in my church who lost his job. He used to be the lead guitarist for Stryper. You remember Stryper? Then he became our children's worship pastor. It's true. One Sunday, I pinned a picture of Stryper in full regalia, all the hair and the makeup and the spandex. I put it up in the church lobby, and I said, would you let this guy take care of your kids? But records weren't selling, and he needed a job, so I got him a job as a paper boy. I got a job for my youth pastor as a paper boy, and pretty soon, everyone in the paper route was going to this church, and everybody in this church was going to that church. I got confused over which one was my church. The people at the paper route, every day for an hour, we'd be together in a warehouse folding papers, mentally not challenging. And so we'd start talking about things. We'd have rubber band wars and when the manager wasn't looking. And they started calling me pastor. And I began to realize that there's no sacred and secular job. For the Christian, everything you do is sacred. That I am fulfilling as much a holy calling delivering the bad news as I am delivering the good news. And that was just the beginning of removing a splinter in my mind, freeing my thinking. So let me talk to you about some of the glass barriers that we hit all the time that are designed by our enemy to keep us in a box so that we don't have influence in the world. Oh, got to turn it on, sorry. We have some compartmentalized thinking that is keeping us in a box. And this thinking comes from the Dark Ages, and it's killing us. And the first one I've addressed already is the secular and sacred divide. This idea that there's secular music and there's sacred music. There are secular books and there are Christian books. There are Christian movies and then there are secular movies. I got to tell you something. Books don't get saved. They have no soul. There's music that has soul. That's a whole other thing. And that's not Christian music, by the way. Usually. I'm not speaking about any of these musicians here. These all have soul. But I began to realize that music is music. There's not Christian music and non-Christian music. It's just music. You might have lyrics written by someone who's a Christian, but the music itself is not saved. It doesn't have a soul. It's not moral or immoral. It's just a reflection of the person who wrote it. There's not Christian schools and non-Christian schools. There's just schools taught sometimes by Christians, taught sometimes by non-Christians. But when you begin to break down this wall, it changes things. As I was talking once, someone says, well, what about a drug dealer? That's not a Christian can't be a drug dealer. I said, I know lots of Christian drug dealers. They're called pharmacists. They just sell it legally because they're Christian. But it's the same thing. The idea is business is business. It's not evil or wrong. It's the people that make things evil. We are either evil or we are sanctified. But the music that we make is just a reflection of who we are. We've bought into this idea that if you touch something secular, it will rub off on you and you'll become unclean. If you touch the leper, you'll become unclean. This is an Old Testament concept that has been changed in the New Testament. The law said if you did touch a leper, you would become unclean. What does Jesus do every time he heals a leper? He touches the leper. He could heal a lot of weird ways. He could have spit on the leper. He does that for blind people. He could heal a lot of different ways. He even healed a guy several kilometers away who he never met, didn't know what disease he had, just said be healed, and he was healed. But for some reason, when it comes to a leper, he reaches out always and touches them. And does Jesus become unclean? No, the leper becomes clean. This is what Christ in you is all about. You are clean, and what you touch can become sanctified. I love the story of Peter up on the roof in Acts, and he's hungry, and God brings this sheet down full of unclean animals. He says, kill and eat, and Peter's, first of all, that doesn't sound appetizing to me. But anyway, kill and eat, and Peter says, no, Lord, never would I eat this, and something that's unclean. And what does God say? What I have cleaned, no longer consider unclean. I have a question for you. When did God clean the pigs? Huh? When did the pigs become sanctified? Or the lobster? Praise God they did, right? How did they get clean? Did he run them through a car wash? No. See, it's not the pigs and the lobsters that were clean. It's that Peter is now clean, and what he touches does not make him unclean. Here's the problem. We have lost sight of what our salvation really, truly is. And if you think your salvation can be tainted by simply eating pork or listening to Led Zeppelin or going to Zoolander in the movie theater, or sending kids to a public school instead of a Christian school, then you don't understand what Jesus bled for, what he rose from the dead for. What you have is so much more, and those things, they can't touch it. They can't change it. And we need to live like we understand that. And stop being afraid of the darkness. Because you, my friend, are the light of the world. The smallest of lights will always overcome the darkest of night. You are a light to the world. That's what Jesus said. You know, how do you get rid of darkness? I once told the students I was working with, okay, I made the room pitch black. I said, get rid of the darkness. Here are your tools: white paint and a vacuum. Ready, set, go. They can't vacuum up the darkness. No matter how many times you paint the walls white, it'll still be dark. The only way to overcome darkness is to turn the light on, because light always overcomes darkness. Do you know why? Because darkness is nothing more than the absence of light. Is there light in your nation? Yes, you are there. Let me ask this: is there darkness in your nation? Yes, and if there is, that's on you, because you're the light. We need to be present in where the places where there is darkness. That's our calling. But we've been boxed in by lies like this one. There's a secular and a sacred. That's just lies. Everything you touch, you bring the power of the King of Kings with you, and you bring light. And there is no darkness powerful enough to withstand that. Period. End of discussion. Stop living in fear that if you listen to the wrong music, or your kids listen to the wrong music, or go to the wrong movie, or hang out with the wrong people, that they're going to suddenly become darkness. That's not how darkness and light works. It goes the other way around. Live like Jesus has risen from the dead and paid the price and given you heaven now. And you'll start to make impact and inroads into the world. That's what it's about. We need to break down this wall of secular and sacred. Now, the next one is where I'm going to maybe step on toes. Let's pray. Another divide that is false is this idea that there's a local church and a para-church. You can find para-church in Hezekiah chapter 4, verse 3. It's not there. There's no such thing as a para-church. Para-church was developed because of our lack of understanding of what church is. We've been confused about church for a long, long, long time. I said yesterday in our little discussion, there's two things that we've got wrong about church discipline. The first is church, the other is discipline. But let me talk about church for a little bit, okay? We've misunderstood what church is all about. Church is not an event. On Sunday morning or Saturday, if you're Adventist, it's not an event. Never was an event. Jesus didn't come, live a life as a servant, die on the cross, rise from the dead so that you can rearrange your Sunday schedule. It's far more than an event. It is not a building with an address. That's not what church is. However, it's been so ingrained in our minds for so long, that glass wall has been there for so long, that if you look it up in Webster's church, one of the first definitions of it is a building. In fact, that's what you say. You say, I'm going to church. I remember there's times, I left my Bible at church. I go to an empty building, not a person around, and I say, I'm going to church? Church is not a building. Not according to the New Testament. According to Webster's, it is. Church is not a school, but we've made it a school. It's all about education. We even say Christian education, Sunday school. It's become an education system, but it's not meant to be a school. It's not a business, but we run it like one. We look for customers. We compete with other such businesses for consumers. And we try to win as many consumers as we can. We have mission statements and values and a board of directors. Because that's what Jesus said to do, right? Church is not a sacred function. Whether it's getting wet or eating crackers and grape juice, that is not what church is. I'm not saying don't obey Jesus, but don't make church just receiving a wafer and a little thimble of grape juice. No wonder people are confused about church. It's not a denomination. It's not a name. It's not a brand. It's not a logo. It's not an organization. There's lots of analogies used in the New Testament for church. It's a body. It's a bride. It's a temple but made of living stones. It's a family. It's a field of wheat. It's a mustard seed. All of them have to do with organic things. Even the building's made with living stones. But if you were to ask someone, what is a church? Give us an analogy. A church is like they would say it's a school or it's a business or it's an event that takes place. We've switched somehow the analogies from the New Testament to these modern versions, and these modern versions are not alive, and we wonder why we're not reproducing. It's because our whole understanding of church has shifted to something it is not. And then our priorities come along with it. And it's so important that we keep the life of the organization going, even at the expense of the life of the disciple. And I got to tell you, Jesus died for people, not an event. So we have to shift our understanding of church. This is what I was taught church is in seminary. It might be familiar to some of you. 5 things, 6 things, sometimes it's 9 marks. It varies with whoever is writing the book. But here's a common understanding of what church is. A group of believers that gather together regularly, that consider themselves a church, that have qualified elders, that practice baptism, communion, sometimes they add church discipline. They have agreed upon doctrinal base and evangelistic purpose. And sometimes, especially if the people that are writing the book are preachers, say, and preaching. They like to throw that in because they preach. It's important. I don't have a problem with any of the things on the list. They're all fine. But I always think it humors me when I see these lists for two reasons. I'm humored by what's on the list, and I'm humored by what's not on the list. First of all, what's on the list? Where in the Bible does it say you have to think you're a church to be a church? If you don't think you're a church, then you're not one. Where's that in the Bible? Why do they even have that there? I'll tell you why. It's because of you. It's to separate the local church from the parachurch. And you know how they do it? It's the third one on the list, fourth one on the list. That's how they do it. If you're not getting wet and eating crackers and grape juice, then you're not a church. And so parachurches can exist and function. They can worship, evangelize, disciple, train up leaders, send off in missions, collect offerings, do all of this, worship. But as long as they don't get wet and eat crackers and juice, it's okay. They're not a church. Where does that come from? It comes from this list. It's right there. This is false thinking, people. God is not up in heaven looking down and you say, they're a church, they're not a church. Church, not a church. Church, not a church. This is not happening. God's not up in heaven saying, oh, I wish you were a church. You're just not wet enough for me. There's a ton of people that are churches that don't believe in baptism and communion. The Friends, the Salvation Army, it goes on and on. Are they church? Not according to this. This is a man-made system that doesn't work for me. But you know what's really astonishing is not what's on the list, but what's not on the list. What's missing? The first thing that jumps out at me is there's no mention of the one another's. How many verses in the Bible mention one another's? You know, you can go to church and never do any one another's. Doesn't that seem like a crime? So I've begun to say, if what you go to, you cannot do the one another's of the New Testament, you're not going to church. You're going to an event. It may be a good event. It may be a fine event. It may be an inspiring event. But churches where you can practice love one another, pray for one another, give preference and honor to one another, confess your sins to one another. You know the list, right? That is what we ought to be on the list, right? There's no character lists here. How many lists of character are there? There's the Beatitudes, the fruit of the Spirit, there's all the character lists, Philippians 4, whatever is right, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, let your mind dwell on these things. All these lists, none of them are here. But you know what's really sadly lacking? What's really missing? Is Jesus didn't make the list. We forgot about Jesus. I think that's a huge oversight. Because here's the problem. If you can define church without Jesus, then you can do church without Jesus. Here we are. That's the problem. See, I think church begins with Jesus. He is what makes us any different from any other organization, right? You remove him from the mix, there's nothing of value we have for the world. The only thing that makes us valuable is the presence of Jesus. So let's at least put him on the list. So here's my understanding of church. It really helps me, all right? Church is the presence of Jesus among his people, called out as a spiritual family to pursue his mission on this planet. So that works for me. Take a picture of it if you're trying to take notes. The presence of Jesus among his people, called out as a spiritual family to pursue his mission on this planet. It starts with Jesus in our midst. He is the head. Now, I mentioned some of those analogies in the New Testament about church, the body, a bride. Okay, let me ask you a few questions. What is a body without a head? Ooh, a corpse. What is a bride without a groom? A widow. What is a building without a foundation? Rubble. What is a flock without a shepherd? Wolf chow. All of them point to one thing specifically, that with the presence of Christ, that makes us. What is a vine? What is a branch without a vine? Firewood. Without the presence of Jesus, we are nothing. Did you hear me? Nothing. The only thing that makes us something is the love of Jesus that took up human flesh, lived a life as a servant, died to pay for my sin, rose from the dead, and gave the helper to me so that he could live with me wherever I go. That is the most important thing about you and the most important thing about me. And try to impress people with that other list. Hey, we're starting a church and this is what it looks like. You want to come? Who wants to go? I don't want to go to that, and I'm the pastor. But I would love to go to a place to meet Jesus. The presence of Jesus among his people, called out as a spiritual family. The one picture of church that's most predominant in the New Testament, it's in every book of the New Testament, as far as the people of God are concerned, is the idea of family. He is the Father, we're brothers and sisters. We are the oikos, the household of God, the family of God. That is who we are. That's not a metaphor. That's a reality. We really are his family. We are his adopted children, heirs of his kingdom. This is a foundation of everything we believe in. The family. But what if you did family the way you do church? You know, you only met once a week. You sat in rows. Mom passed a bag. Dad preached a sermon, or maybe it's the other way around. We're into equality around here. Dad passes the bag. Actually, that's the way most families work anyway, and Mom does the preaching. Just teasing. It's just a joke. Don't tweet that. Yeah, tweet it without the underscore, and that's okay. Yeah, you wouldn't do, that would be a dysfunctional family. Now, I know a lot of you grew up in families that you wish that was the true example, because some dysfunctional families are a lot harder to deal with. But in real family, if you only see each other once a week and then you go away, I don't think that's really what family is. We need to be able to see each other's face instead of the back of each other's head. We need to interact. We need to love one another. We need to pray for each other. We need to confess our sins to one another. We need to give preference and honor to one another. This is what the church is. We've got to break that glass wall and accept that we are a family of God on mission together. And it's not our mission. This is important. You know, we oftentimes make mission a subcategory in church. There's church, and church has fellowship, church has worship, and church has mission. And when you want to serve, we find out your spiritual gift because we do a job placement exam. And we find a role for you to serve in one of these subcategories. That is not the way it works. Mission is not a subcategory of church. The church doesn't have a mission. The mission has a church. The mission existed before the church. The church exists because of mission. The mission didn't begin in Acts chapter 1. It didn't begin in Matthew chapter 1. It began in Genesis chapter 3. When God came to the garden saying, Adam, where are you? And he has been seeking to save those who are lost ever since then. And because of that mission, we have been born again, and we have a family, and that's church. The mission comes before church. I'm speaking to a bunch of missionaries. You're all saying, amen, that's fine. Okay, move on. Now, if you were a bunch of theologians, not that you're not theologians. Let's go back to our walls. So, We've got to break down this idea that there's a local church and a parachurch. That doesn't exist. If you're in his family, you're in my family, and that's enough for me. We are a family. Third wall, clergy and laity. You know, the old joke is the clergy are paid to be good and the laity are good for nothing. We have some serious problems where we think there are professional Christians that are more called, more gifted, more presence of God in their life than others. And so they do the holy work, and we throw papers to make enough money to give them 10%. What? Where is that in the Bible? I'm having a hard time finding it. In fact, what I find is the exact opposite. You know, who is the greatest in the kingdom? Jesus, and then he says John the Baptist. And then he says what? But in the kingdom, he's the least of everyone. What does that mean? How can you be the first and the last? Well, in God's kingdom, the first is the last. Now, if you're having a race and the gun goes off and then everybody runs, and then when you come to the finish line, the person who comes in first also comes in last, what do you have? You either have a one-man race or you have a tie. See, in God's economy, it's a tie. John the Baptist is not greater than me, and I am not greater than he. That we are all beloved by Jesus equally. There are not some more spiritual than others. It's not as though God's salvation is more miraculous for some people and less for others. This is false thinking. This is a lie that has somehow become a splinter in your mind and kept you from so much good work.